Welcome everyone to Gold Derby's Meet the Experts group panel. We are joined today by Rachel Fleit for introducing Selma Blair, Andrea Fine and Sean Fine for LFG, Robert Greene for Procession, Jimmy Chin for The Rescue, and Ting Pu and Leo Scott for Val. Thank you all for being here. I would love to know, starting with Rachel, what is the most rewarding aspect about documentary filmmaking? Why do you do this as your profession?
That's such a good question. I think for me, it's the way that you are able to see a person, to see yourself in that person. I'm totally a verite documentary filmmaker in that I like to see like the beauty and the mundanity of life, like the beauty in the mundanity, and just, I see myself in my characters, my subjects. I think that in making Selma's documentary, I watched her embrace herself. I watched it unfold, go through something so scary. And it was like she gave me permission to embrace myself. So, and then the most amazing thing in the end is hearing from all of these people around the world who are watching the film and seeing themselves in Selma and having their own experience of saying like, me too, I feel that way. I identify, I feel seen, and she's given me permission to embrace myself too. So I don't know, just exploring like the messiness and the beauty of being a human. It's kind of hard to be alive. I think documentaries help you embrace that.
Andrea and Sean?
I think for me, it's sort of twofold. And the first is, I just am relentlessly curious about people. I never get tired of feeling like it's an honor to have someone sit in front of you and you've maybe met for a very little amount of time and just share some of like the most intense periods of their life with you. I think that that's a gift that we never take for granted, that you're holding, and you choose with honor what you do with it. It's like a promise you make to them to go with that with honor. And I think it just, you're watching people go through the journey of life and you're learning, you're learning about their walking on the path in front of you, and you're going to learn from that behind it. And then I think the flip side, because that's all about me, the flip side is the other side is like, what about what you can change perspective on for somebody else? That you're opening somebody up to like walking in the shoes of somebody else and doing it with beauty and doing it with art and doing it with like heart, make them care about something that they may not even totally think that they are a part of, but somehow they're connected to at the end. I think that is really moving, and I never tire of that. So I think that that's why, because I think we all know that most of what we do is really hard, and you have those peak moments that make it worth it, but most of it's like problem solving and the slog and all that kind of stuff that's hard, but the rest of it's really rewarding. I think when you get to the end, it's like childbirth, you forget
Yeah, I mean, we're married, so obviously Andrea just said everything that I feel 100%.
Boom.
And we're directing partners. Like, yeah, I mean, I think that's also, it's amazing because documentaries are so big now and getting bigger, and I think it's great. And I think that it's a really hard form of filmmaking. And you could see on this panel how many different types of filmmaking and filmmaking brains are involved. You've got recreations, you've got dramatic things, you've got, graphics with art, you got lots of different things to tell a documentary story now. And I think that it's just a very challenging way to make a film and to be truthful about what you're telling. And also what I love about it is trying to bring like this craft and this kind of this beauty and this emotional feel to it that movies that I saw when I was a kid or when I was younger brought me to tears or laughter or joy. Like, I think we can do that with documentaries, and even more so. But I think that the skill to do that and the skill to bring in filmmaking and storytelling is something that I always look forward to every time we kind of look at a film we're doing. How are we gonna crack this nut, and how are we gonna tell that story? So so that on top of what she said.
And Robert, how about you?
I love what everybody said. I think there's a cliche about documentaries that we want to change the world with our films, but I don't know about that. You know, I don't know how I feel about that necessarily. I don't know if that's possible. I want to think it's possible. I know you know, they can have a positive effects, certainly, but I know for sure that the films that we make change the lives of the participants on screen. I know for sure that when you film people, when you tell their stories, when you spend this time together, that it has an effect. And sometimes that effect is positive, and sometimes that effect is not positive. And so, you know, for me, the thing that I get most excited about with documentary is just trying to find new ways to collaborate and give agency as much as I can give agency. And collaboration goes two ways, you know. I mean, it's a little bit, I mean, this is, I don't want to say like my students, I teach documentary filmmaking at the University of Missouri. And I often say like I learn as much from my students as they learn from me. And I think that's a cliche, but it's very true. And I think with making films like this, it's a little bit similar, you know. I do believe after making these films for as long as me and my team have made these films together, that we have some capacity for how they can make positive change in people's lives, how we can learn from mistakes that we've made, learn from, you know, sort of like the limitations of this messy form of making documentaries together, right? And do something positive. And that's kind of what was the impetus of this film. I feel like I'm always asking, you know, why make a film? Why do this? Why make a film? And if I don't have a good answer for that, I won't move forward, right? But at the same time, these guys changed my life. The 6 men, these 6 survivors have been leaders for me in my life. I've grown as a human being. I've been able to look back at my own mistakes that I've made and things that I've been sort of hampered by. And frankly, I've gone into therapy for the first time in my life. Not because the film sort of induced some bad feeling for me, but the exact opposite. Because watching these guys go through what they've gone through and their ability to take their own pain and do something with it was just so eye-opening to me that now I see the possibilities of confronting my own, you know, pain from the past, right? So that's, to me, it's just about family. It's just about faith even. You know, I'm not a very religious person, but faith was taken from these guys by the Catholic Church, the abusers in the Catholic Church and the system that the Catholic Church enabled. And the fact that we could find faith together and belief together in making this film, that, you know, that's why we made this, and that's why I still have hope for making other films in the future, certainly.
Jimmy, what about you?
I would say that, you know, the stories that Chai and I are interested in really, you know, they have to be really moving and inspiring. I'm often drawn to these types of stories where I'm totally inspired by the characters and the subjects. I guess China have been calling them the participants, you know, because they're more participants than subjects. It kind of like, Robert was saying, I mean, they are part of the process, you know. And for some reason, I've always felt compelled when I'm really moved or inspired by a story to share that story, because, you know, I've been so moved by it. It's had like a dramatic or kind of impact on you know, me trying to be the best version of myself. But, you know, we're also accountable to these participants. We're telling their stories too. So there's this kind of 2 sides to it, and I also think Andrea said it as well. You know, there's a side that's kind of for myself, and then there's this other side of sharing the stories of these participants. And in the rescue, you know, in some ways, the divers talked to me while we were making the film, and they were saying, you know, in some ways we made it look too easy, because from what everybody else saw, we went in and then we came out with the kids. And the story of like what they went through and, you know, what they were willing to risk to save these kids, many of which hadn't even met them, was just amazing. And, you know, if we could all only be that heroic and that selfless and that generous, that would be amazing. And to share that, and, you know, it's like Robert said too, though, it's like, are we really, you know, we're trying to change the world. That's pretty lofty, but, you know, if we can make the world just a little better, and have a few people who are like truly moved to act on that, you know, idea of selflessness and generosity, that's, you know, it's a hopeful, but it's something to aspire to. And lastly, just, I mean, I always think of us as making these films because these films are like empathy machines. Like, we're trying to create empathy. And I just think the world can always use a little more empathy.
Yeah, especially nowadays, right?
Yeah.
And Ting and Leo, what brings you to the documentary genre? Why is this so passionate for you guys?
Well, I think like a lot of the other panelists, I'm fascinated by people and just get the opportunity to get to know people who are seemingly a lot different from me, and yet discover that we're not so different. And I think that's kind of a little bit of what we're all saying, is like, there's nothing more powerful than watching a film about somebody who you seemingly have nothing in common with, but then at the end of it, just be like, oh, I am that person. So I think that's, for me, is what's powerful about documentary in particular, because these are real stories, these are real people. So it's just wonderful to be able to make films about them.
And many of the projects you all are here to talk about today are kind of ongoing stories. And how do you know, as filmmakers, when to end it, when to have the final scene, or should you keep waiting to see how the story unfolds? Andrea and Sean, I kind of made a joke about, you know, a sequel to the movie, but how did you know that the ending that you chose was the right way to end it?
It's funny, we end with the judge's decision coming unexpectedly out of left field a little earlier than everyone thought. But it's funny, we've had a couple times when people say like, well, how do you end on such a downer kind of thing? And I'm like, no, you missed the whole point, right? Like the War Dance, a film we made years ago, same thing. You have the kids come back and they go to a music competition and they come and they don't win the whole thing, right? They're the underdog kind of idea, but it's like, no, it was the journey, right? It's the journey. And so I think in some ways we were kind of handed a, hey, dummy, here's the end, because the judge weighed in and you're not really going to find out anything else for, it could be 2 weeks, 2 years, you don't really know, and you can't live like that in the film world. So it felt natural that it sort of became the metaphor for a movement. Movements suck. It's hard. You take 2 steps forward, 1, 3 steps back, 4 steps forward. It's it's an ebb and flow. And I think these women's process relates to everybody who's trying to do anything like that, whether it's for equal rights or against racism or equality with a capital E, it's like that. So I think the end is the journey, and it's sort of a nice point in the journey to take it, because they're vowing to fight and they're going to tell us when the story kind of continues. I don't think it will end. It's going to keep going.
And I don't think there is no perfect ending in a documentary. Life is messy. And I think the best endings are the ones you don't expect, the ones that aren't everyone won the competition or everyone. I think those are the unexpected great endings. And I think that, as I've learned throughout my career, that the more I think I'm going to film the end, or this is the scene that's going to be the end, it doesn't become the end. Like, real life isn't like that. And there's always a happy surprise in a documentary. And I think that's also why I love making documentaries, because ends are like that. And that happened in LFG, and it just felt like the right place. We also I don't know, we kind of say this saying, like, you never really, you never finish you never finish a film, you abandon it, because it's like you could make a film forever if you don't stop. So you have to at some point say it's enough, So yeah.
Robert, what about you? How do you know when to end one of your works?
Well, for me, it's just like everything with I love everything was just said, but just like everything with documentary filmmaking, it's a combination of the idea you have and what actually happens, right? And so it's always the tension between the concept and reality and everything that, all the serendipitous or awful or beautiful or all the things that were actually going to happen in the film, which is exactly, I want to echo what was just said, is exactly why I make these films, because I know the limitations of my own ideas, and documentaries are all for people who are excited by ideas, but know the limitations of those ideas as well. And so it's an exciting world to work in. But I would say for me, the last few films there have been, well, actually going back to the beginning, most of my films, I've got 7 feature documentaries, and most of them I've had an idea of what the ending was like, only in the sense that I knew what the goal was to get to. So there's a couple days leading up to a high school graduation, or it's a week leading up to this professional wrestling match, or we're going to get to this moment where everyone comes together, or we're going to get to the moment where we've done all these sort of processes with these just different guys for Procession. And for me, having that goal is super important. And then, you never know what actually is going to be the actual ending. So we had scripted an ending, literally scripted. I want all you guys to be back together in one space. COVID made that impossible, right? So then the ending became about this other kind of coming together that we were able to sort of structure. And really, it was like one guy going back to one final spot that he needed to get to have some a little bit of closure in his life. And then there's this moment, I think probably everyone who makes films can relate to this in some ways. You just kind of shoot that last thing, you look around, and everyone's shoulders are just a little bit like lower. And it just feels like, okay, like I don't really want to pick up the camera to keep going, so yes, you can make a film forever, but there's also an emotional stopping place that you sort of look for. And if you're really in tune with the people you're working with, you'll find that. Having said all that, a couple nights ago, we're in, New York, and there's a standing ovation for our movie. And that's just as much a part of the process that we were doing in the filmmaking itself. In other words, there is no ending as well, like the sort of contracts that you make with the participants in your film, the friendships you make, the collaborations that you create, they don't stop when you're done making the movie. Like I've bailed former subjects of films out of jail before. Like I had dinner the other night with a person who was in my film 7 years ago. This is just, I feel like it's really about building this thing together, and that doesn't stop. It certainly doesn't stop when the movie's still screening, and it doesn't stop many years after as well, as far as the relationships that I've built, which I'm really proud of, actually, because that gives us chance to really learn from what we did together.
And Jimmy, how about you?
The ending. Well, sometimes I feel like it presents itself, and I think a few people have mentioned that sometimes you don't know what it's going to be. You might have an idea of what it's going to be, but through the process of making the film, you kind of can hopefully discover the end. There's like the idea of like a logical ending, but I think in The Rescue, we end on this final shot of Saman and the statue kind of celebrating his legacy and what he did. I mean, he basically made the greatest sacrifice as a volunteer to save someone. And that image is, for us, representative of like this idea that the film is really about. And it's about generosity. And then it kind of closes. But interestingly, for the end credits, Chai had these local artists from Chiang Rai do these paintings of the story of the rescue, because there's this idea of this mythology of the princess in that is, you know, is part of this mountain lore. And we wove that into the story, but Chai thought, well, this story is going to be in the future like a folkloric story. And so she had them paint what that, you know, folkloric story would be. And so we ended it there. But it was a pretty natural ending for us here in terms of they got the kids out, and we just wanted to hit the right notes and make sure that we kind of ended with something that, you know, pointed to the heart of the film.
And Ting and Leo, how about you guys?
Yeah, the ending, we, like Robert, we had a kind of our sort of intended ending was affected by COVID, in that we had this whole thread through the film that we had written in the early concept about the heightened reality, you know, with the we were going to shoot some scenes on the river with Val as Mark Twain, which was his dream to take Twain to Hollywood, but also to Broadway, but also we had this kind of metaphorical poetic imagery that we wanted to weave through the film. We didn't get to shoot those elements, and that was going to be the ending. And we ended up making something that Ting's actually idea for this ending, which was like actually constructed a bit in the edit, I suppose, but we did replace, I suppose, ultimately the idea of Twain. We shot a scene with Jack and Val, so father and son walking into the
Hollywood sunset, dressed as Batman and Robin, to sort of echo what Val did with his brothers when they were young, and just sort of that like Hollywood's fairy tale type of ending. But we also constructed, there's the actual ending of your film, and then it's like, when do you know you're at the end? Because a lot of times you can have the ending very early on. It's like, oh, that's the ending. But to know when it's actually pencils down time is a very hard thing to do, because sometimes you just have to have someone come and just like take your pencil away and be like, it's like, but usually you get to a point in your film and you're like, I'm not making this any better. I'm, like the increments of improvement start becoming fewer and fewer. And you just get that feeling when you're like, okay, I think it's done now. Like it's singing, maybe 2 versions ago, it was singing its best version. And you sort of revert to that. But
and even with Val, who, we were showing stuff along the way, and he's quite sort of free about the idea, like this is a film. This is not the film. You could go and make other films with this material. You can make a film. You could go off in sort of horizontal tangents, branches off this film, and explore the life of his brother, or you could do something about Twain still. So with Val, it was kind of like he was quite free about the whole thing, and I would say I'd be fascinated to see. We chose this very first person thing with Val. We did it very deliberately, and it was in the very first concept. But I'd be very curious to see it like a third person type, where we actually have these other perspectives on Val, and maybe use some of the same material. But yeah, so the ending was, it wasn't the exact ending we set out for, but we kind of recognized it when we had it,
And Rachel, I started with you, so I will end with you. Pun intended, how do you know when the end has arrived in one of your documentaries?
I felt it. I think someone said that. I felt it the last day we filmed. I said, I'm done here. And every single time I see Selma, I think, oh, where are the cameras? We got to keep going. Because, for me, she was always going to have MS. We state very clearly on in the film that MS has no cure. And also this idea of like, then she like runs off into the sunset because she's like, her symptoms have disappeared, is actually kind of ableist. People in the world live with so much. And so I didn't want to spread that message. But yeah, it was just like, I'm done here. This story will continue to unfold, but the story I'm telling is over. And we often joke about the sequel or the prequel.
Well, thank you everyone for joining Gold Derby today. Best of luck this awards season. I hope everyone runs out and watches all of these fantastic documentaries right now.